I'm going to be talking a bit about my part-time masters. So for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Parvin. I'm a UX UI designer at Dekker, and I'm going to tell you a bit about what art history is, what the course is, why I'm doing it, how it relates to UX design, and then we will have some time to do a bit of art history together. So hopefully that'll be some fun. So art history is very different to art itself. So it's not about making artworks. I'm not spending every week painting or doing watercolors or sculpting as much as I'd love to be. It's also very different from art critique, which is what newspapers do when they review exhibitions or auction houses do. And the goal of art critique is really to say whether or not artwork is good or bad. Whereas art history is a much more interdisciplinary discipline. So it takes in things from history, philosophy, sociology, and it's really changed since the 70s. In the 70s, art historians really started to systematically engage with something called theory. Theory is a tool for engaging with lines of inquiry, so critical theory. And there are lots of types of theory, so queer theory, Marxist theory, semiotics is the study of reading signs into things, psychoanalysis, and post-colonialism. So there's lots of other bits, but it's a very interdisciplinary approach where you look at the context of how an artwork is made. My master's is really interesting because it's not chronological. So lots of art history degrees, you go through the isms. So you might go through, Renaissance art, Fauvism, Impressionism, Modernism. This master's is thematic. So we started by looking at artists and authorship. What does it mean for an artist to create an artwork? Is it the artist's responsibility to give meaning to an artwork? Is it the viewer's responsibility? So stuff about Foucault and death of the author, stuff like that. Then our last module was on style as a tool for doing art history. The one I'm about to start is on interpretation and reception. So that's like iconology, semiotics, stuff like that. And it just kind of goes on in this like thematic way. And I'm doing it at the Open University, which is an amazing, amazing institution. It's all remote, so there's no in-person teaching. The way it works is it's a part-time thing, so it's over 2 years. And then we have 4 blocks, and each one has online reading, so it's kind of like a textbook, but just online. And then there's a tutorial, and then there's an essay to go with that. And the tutorial is like a group of 10, so it's quite chill. So 4 essays this year. I've done 2 of them already. Got one due in a couple of weeks, and then a slightly longer one due in June. And then the second year, the work gets a bit harder because there's more essays and a dissertation. But also you can take some time out. So I might not necessarily do the second year straight away. Because it's a master's, I'm expected to have an undergrad level familiarity with art history, which I don't have. I have a very strange combined undergrad master's philosophy degree. And when I applied, I just sent them my former degree certificate. They were like, yes, yes, what have you. So I do have to do a bit of extra reading and make sure I'm up to speed with some stuff. The other interesting thing is it's 16 to 18 hours of reading a week, which is not what I'm managing. I'm managing probably about 20 minutes of reading a week on the weekend. So the way I've actually realized works best for me, when I started, I thought, I'd wake up an hour early or I'd do a bit after work. I've realized now what works well for me is to, instead of switching my brain between work context and, academic reading context, works better to just do whole days at a time. So when I have essays coming up, I go to the library for a couple of weekends in a row, and I've taken off innovation days. So usually I'll take off, our deadlines are weirdly on Thursdays. So usually I take off the Wednesday and Thursday so that I can get my essay like fully written up and do all the reading. So it's not actually that much extra work a week, but it is quite a bit. So why I'm doing it, I'm just really interested in art history. I think you can see behind me, I've got lots of books. I bought loads of books on art history last year, and I think I got really into art a few years ago and just wanted to know more about it. Bought loads of books, didn't really carve out time to read them. So this is kind of what I call a getting things done hack. It's a way to pay someone else some money so that I feel incentivized to get it done. I've done this with a few different things in my life, and it's quite a good way of getting things done. But yeah, so this is a way for me to just go away and learn about art history. It's very affordable. I looked into it because I moved in to this lovely flat last September with 2 postgrad students and really wanted to do a postgrad degree. And I looked up the Open University, and the whole of this year's tuition fee is less than 1 month's take-home salary. I think people think further study, higher education is very, very expensive, but the Open University in particular is quite affordable. And I just really missed academic study. I did quite an academic undergrad master's degree. It's a very, very different type of work to professional services work. It's a lot of argument, structuring, essay writing, research, independent research. I really miss that type of work. So it's a way to kind of bring that back without fully committing to How does it relate to UX UI? If you don't know the terms, UI is user interface design, so what the ketchup bottle looks like. UX is how it works, what the experience is. I actually don't think there is a creative connection because art history, as I said, it's not about doing artwork or creative work. It's very much about constructing arguments, studying theory. But actually, I don't think that UX and UI is about doing creative work either. Now, I know lots of people will disagree with me. There are some designers on this call who will definitely disagree with me. But I think a lot of the hard part of UX and UI is doing research and creating systems and using pre-existing design patterns and putting all those blocks together. So actually there is a crossover, and the crossover comes from conducting research. It's about structuring arguments really well, which is very useful when presenting to stakeholders. You have to be able to convince people of your design decisions. And it really is about conveying written information clearly and succinctly. I think communicating design decisions, if that's in a Jira ticket or in a long Slack message, given we're all working asynchronously and remotely, being able to convey stuff really succinctly is such a huge skill, which I think this degree is helping me get better at. Cool. So that's just being me rambling a lot. Now I'm going to turn it over to the people on the call, and we're going to do a bit of art history. So this is a painting. Who wants to tell me anything about this painting? Anyone feel free to jump off mute.
Looks Dutch.
Yeah.
Looks Dutch? What makes you think that?
The colouring and then there is an element of precision about it that you quite often don't.
Yeah, it's very detailed, right?
Yeah.
You can see the expression in his eyes.
Yeah.
What do we think he's thinking about? Does anyone want to hazard a guess? Looks hungry. Yeah, maybe.
Why didn't I go into IT and make some money instead of being an artist? I don't know.
So this is a painting by a man called Theodore Géricault, who mostly did landscapes, but did a series of portraits, and they were called portraits of madnesses or portraits of the insane. Only 5 of them survive, but there's this very beautiful book. I've actually got it somewhere there, called 10 Madnesses by Fiona Tan, and she's an art historian, but also wrote this very creative short book. 5 of these paintings went missing, so she was like, what are the 5 madnesses that were missing? So he's a kleptomaniac. There's a painting of a child kidnapper, a painting of a woman scorned with jealousy. So all these portraits of mad people, and she was like, what could be the missing madnesses? And she does historical research, finds out he went to an asylum in France to paint these. So there's lots of research like that. So really interesting. I don't know, I found that kind of stuff, the context, really interesting. All right, next one. Who can tell me what this is, who this is, what's going on here?
It's Picasso.
Picasso, yes. Why do you know that? How do you know that?
I studied on school level, but there's a whole Cubist movement. And
Yeah.
I don't know what it was called, something about dances, famous dances.
Yeah, so this is Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. But yes, you're right, it's Picasso. You can tell from the Cubist faces, the kind of overly sexualized female form, but it's also quite difficult to look at. You really want to look away from it, but it kind of draws you in. But it's interesting, isn't it, that it's very recognizable as an artist. It's like we pin this to Picasso, not even Cubism in generally, but we're like, this is Picasso. So it's interesting questions about the power that an artist has. Obviously, Picasso's works now command a lot of money because museums and institutions prop up his works. So interesting questions around that. Does anyone know who this is? Obviously, knowing who it is isn't the most important question here, maybe. But anyone want to say anything about this?
Mondrian? Looks
It's
a bit
not
Mondrian.
a Mondrian. What do people feel while looking at this?
Off balance.
Off balance, yeah. I mean, very colorful, clearly. Geometric. Do people like this artwork? Would you have this, on a wall in your house?
I'd have it. I wouldn't pay money for it. I mean, it's pleasing. But...
if it were free.
Yeah, no, I mean,
waiting room, somewhere you're not going to spend a ton of time looking at it.
I don't think I'd have this on my wall, but I probably wouldn't have had the other ones either, to be fair.
Stressful is a really interesting phrase, because when you think about, so this is a Ukrainian artist called Kazimir Malevich, so very early 20th century, and he was influenced by Impressionism, Cubism, Fauvism. He traveled kind of all around Europe and created this very colorful, passionate, stressful, I think is a very good word, geometric styles of art. And very early 20th century, later 1906, 1907, around then. So it's before there was a lot of abstract art coming out. And then very sadly, so a lot of his work was connected to, the history of the Soviet Union. But when Stalin rose to power, he was banned entirely from painting abstract works of art and had to only do representational portraits. I was actually just chatting to my girlfriend about this, and she told me something I didn't know. He used to sign all of his artworks with a little black square as kind of a symbol of that censorship almost. And when he died, there were loads of like parades in the streets where they held up things with a little black square on it. So yeah, Kazimir Malevich. Cool. Anyone recognize who this is? This is more the kind of art I really like, much more abstract and sculptural.
Are they huge or are they kind of like tabletop size?
They're huge, yeah.
They're
you
huge.
can walk around
So
these
that's,
pieces.
What's her name?
Exactly.
British sculptress.
Barbara Hepworth.
Barbara Hepworth. No, it's not Barbara Hepworth, is it?
No, it is.
It is Barbara Hepworth. There you go.
I really love Barbara Hepworth. These very kind of, I think they're hugely calming, big, soft, sculptural, lots of spheres, ovoids, conical forms, carved out bits. So there's lots of interesting stuff. She was working as a sculptor around the same time as Henry Moore. They studied in the same place. And there's writings of Henry Moore saying, oh yeah, I told Barbara Hepworth to get into art. She was doing simple watercolors before she met me. And you read interviews with her and look at her history, and she was like, no, she was doing sculpture when she was like 14, 15, 16 in school. And there's all this stuff about it being like symbols of fertility and eggs. And then you see Henry Moore's figures. And so just really interesting to like appreciate the context as well as the art for itself. Let's get a bit more wacky. I won't throw this out to everyone because it's quite hard to know what this is. But this is a piece of art I saw in Paris called the Metro Cubo d'Infinito. And it is not a photocopier, but it does have mirrors in it, like a photocopier does. So what this is 6 mirrors all pointing inwards. And the idea here is, obviously, as a viewer of this, you can never see what's inside, and even creaking it open a little bit would let some light in. So it's, impossible to imagine or conceive what it's like inside of that, which makes it really interesting, right? Because you can only see it from the outside and walk around it. So this is like more conceptual art, which I really like. This is, I wonder if does anyone recognize what this room is? Anyone here been to Glasgow recently?
Macintosh. Charles Rennie Macintosh.
Exactly. Charles Rennie
Before the
Macintosh.
fire, presumably.
I think this is a recreation of one of the tea rooms. So yeah. So Macintosh was an architect, a woodworker. He built these kind of mad, very tall chairs with little square cutouts. But his artworks were, or his rooms, they were rooms that him and his partner lived in, and then academics lived in them, and they're now preserved as artworks. But at the time, everyone was just like, oh, this man has like a funny old room. And it's interesting because, you wouldn't have thought to call this art. It is just a room, but every piece of the room, the light fixtures, the chairs, the way he positioned the windows and the light coming through the windows, in totality, he called or thought of as an artwork. And there's a silly German word for this called Gesamtkunstwerk, which means total work of art. So this is a piece of art by an artist I really like called Katie Patterson, who's a Scottish artist, and she does loads of really cool conceptual art. This was from her degree show, and you would go into a gallery and see this on the wall, and if you called it, what you would hear would be the sound of a glacier melting, and it was named after that glacier. It was a glacier in Iceland, and you could like call up the number and hear that. And when we go back to the, if I go back to the Picasso, it's like, how is this and that? How are we calling them both art? Why are we presenting them both in a gallery? So it's really interesting to think about like this definition of what art is, how viewers appreciate art, what you see, and what messages art can bring, how it can be used as a tool. So if you went to an art gallery and saw this on a wall, because you're in the context of an art gallery, maybe that's enough to call it art. But yeah, maybe you're quite right. Maybe this shouldn't be called art because it is just a phone number. I think what makes it unique is definitely, the message and the meaning behind it. If that phone number wasn't connected to anything, if we weren't humans who knew what to recognize a phone number was, maybe if you weren't from the UK and you didn't know that 07 meant that it was something down, you were just like, wow, there's some random numbers on a wall. So all of that context, I think, is what makes this really interesting. So I'm going to move on quickly and talk about these two artworks. So this is a piece by Noguchi, who's a Japanese sculptor, and another Barbara Hepworth piece. And my last essay was on critically assessing the concept of style. So for this, we had to pick two artworks. So what I did here was say, style is necessary but not sufficient. It's necessary because you can't help grouping things with style. As we've done in this whole call, everyone's been looking at styles and saying, oh, this is a Picasso, this one looks Dutch, this looks like this. So instinctively, reflexively, we have to like use style to look at artworks. But in this, I argued it wasn't sufficient because there's a lot more context that we need. So again, looking at some of those artworks where I told you the context, maybe of Malevich, maybe of that Jericho painting we started with, that context gives you so much more information and is, I would argue, required for doing the practice of art history. So in this essay, I made that argument, and then I did a stylistic analysis of these pieces, so a formal analysis. So talked about, you know, what they had in similar, the ovoid shape, the reflexive nature. One's more shiny than the other. Basically, one has a big hole in it with some strings in the middle. And then went on to say there are limitations. If you just use style, you fall into a trap of historicizing, which means grouping things by ism. And then I also argue that, you know, style isn't really a relevant degree or tool in most postmodernist art. So looking at that phone number piece of art, you know, you can't really say that that's a particular style. You can't say, oh, it's romantic art or Renaissance art. It just doesn't really make any sense anymore. So I think that's another limitation of style for the practice of art history. So yeah, I just thought it'd be useful to, or interesting to chat through one of the essays. So some key takeaways. I know I've just talked about art a lot for like 20 minutes, but one of the big takeaways here is that And is just such an amazing company because it champions this kind of culture of learning and self-development. You know, before I started this master's, I checked in with my squad lead. I made sure I could do this and manage my time around client work. You know, I'm still working full time while doing this part time. But I also felt super confident that And would be supportive. You know, I didn't start and say I'm going to try and hide this and not tell work about it. I was like, no, I'm gonna do this, and I know that And is going to support me. And I knew that because I haven't used my training budget for this course, but there are, you know, shorter courses or cheaper courses where training budget would make a lot of sense to use. I've used lots of innovation days. We get lots of innovation days. Hopefully with it being on Luna, people will have a bit more transparency of how to use them and when to use them. So basically, if you're interested in doing something like this, you should definitely go do it. And also, if you want to talk to me about any of it, I'm very happy to chat to you about this or about art in general. Thank you. Thanks for listening, everyone.